Okay, so now we're on check the facts. Checking the facts is when you try to find out whether your interpretation or thoughts about an event are actually factual. In other words, does what you think happened actually happened? All right, so that's basically what check the facts are. And the reason you have to check the facts is a lot of the time our emotions have nothing to do with the facts. They have everything to do with our thoughts and interpretations of the fact. So for example, an event, you may observe an event and it can cause you to have a set of thoughts. And then instead of responding to the event, you respond to the thoughts. And you get very emotional. Now what's really interesting is it's also true somewhat the other way around. Emotions can influence your interpretations of the facts. So that now you have a bunch of interpretations that are problematic that you wouldn't have had if you weren't emotional in the first place. So it's going to be really important to learn how to figure out what are the actual facts, which is to say what actually has happened, what's really going on, and to be able to tell the difference between a fact and an interpretation or a thought about a fact. So that's what this skill is all about. The first part of the skill is to figure out what your actual emotion is. So the first thing you have to do is decide what emotion you're trying to change. So I'm going to assume for the moment that you figured that out, all right? The next thing you want to ask is what was the prompting event? Remember, the prompting event is what happened right before you had the emotion. So you're going to ask yourself, what was the event that prompted this emotion? So try to write down whatever event that you know about. Then you write down your interpretation of the event. What do you think it means? And then you check both whether your belief about the facts are correct, and you also look at your interpretations. So for example, you come home and you're supposed to go out with your boyfriend or girlfriend, and your boyfriend or girlfriend are asleep on the couch, and you think to yourself, they don't love me. They clearly don't care about me. They would have been up, ready, at the door to whiz me out and go out. Okay? So that's an interpretation. So you feel unloved. Now you're too grumpy and you don't even want to go out. You're sort of irritated. And if you do go out, you act irritated through the whole meal, da-da-da-da-da. Okay, now, what are other possible interpretations of that? One thing you could check the facts. Does it really mean the person doesn't love you? It's probably not a good idea to just ask, do you love me? But you could actually check the facts and say, you were asleep, I thought we were going out. Because if you did that, you might find out that your boyfriend or girlfriend would say, oh yeah, I was taking a nap. I wanted to make sure I was wide awake and we had a really good time and I didn't try to come home too early. So that's checking the facts, and it's also checking your interpretation. So that's important to do. So now, sometimes you can't really check out your interpretation, okay? Because sometimes your interpretation is an emotional thought about the future, all right? So let's say that really what's going on is not that you're interpreting something in the present, but that you're expecting something in the future. And so you're very distressed, okay? So in these situations, what you want to do is ask yourself, is there a threat? In other words, what's the threat to me? What threat am I imagining? And that can take a lot of work to figure out what threat you're imagining, because sometimes we're not that aware that we're assuming that some threatening event is going to happen. So when you have a threat, you want to say, what's the probability it's true? Now, that doesn't mean there's a zero probability, but often it does mean it's not a big probability. What's the real probability you're going to fail? What's the real probability you're not going to get a job? What's the real probability, da-da-da-da-da? So you want to ask yourself that. Now, if you don't trust yourself, which sometimes it's reasonable not to, you can check it out with friends. You can check it out with people you trust. You can say, talk to other people about it and see what other people think. So you don't want to just automatically believe the dire consequences you've made up for yourself for your life, all right? Next thing you want to ask yourself is it really the catastrophe that I think it is? Often we think a catastrophe is on its way when one is not on its way. But telling yourself that there's no catastrophe is not a good move, because telling yourself there's no catastrophe when sometimes there is. What you want to tell yourself instead is that if there's a catastrophe coming, I can cope with it. And so what you want to do is realize that sometimes really negative things do happen. And the threat, this is when you have an idea in your mind, there's a threat, and the threat that you've got in your mind on this one is not that, the problem is not that you think a catastrophe is coming. The problem is you got the facts wrong about whether you can cope with it. And so in these situations, you want to imagine that you can cope with it. You want to remind yourself that you've got skills and you're going to be able to get through it. Sometimes the problem is not your actual emotion. Have you never noticed that? Sometimes the problem is your emotion actually does fit the facts. The real problem is the intensity of the emotion doesn't fit the facts. So I could be annoyed that someone came to my house and broke a glass in my kitchen. Okay, so I could be annoyed. All right, that might make sense, or at least slightly irritated or wishing that they hadn't, being disappointed. One of those emotions really fit. But would rage fit that? I don't think so. So when you end up with a really extreme emotion that doesn't seem to fit the facts, it's always a good thing to say, what's the threat? Almost always, you've got some threat in your mind. And often once you figure out what the threat is, you can see, oh, yeah, right, that's not a problem. Check the facts. Often, once you know what the real facts are, your emotion really changes. So this is a good skill. Try it out.